Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. In today's video, we'll be taking a look at the 2024 Senate election in Ohio and my current prediction for this race, specifically looking at the polls that have come out that are very good for Sherrod Brown, and I'll be using these polls as an opportunity to discuss why I think maybe Democrats aren't going to win Ohio. So first, I do want to apologize. I've had a bit of a cold the past couple of days. That's why I haven't uploaded, and so if you can still kind of detect it in my voice, my apologies. But these polls were released a few days ago, and I didn't want to wait any longer, so we're just going to go through it now. I hope my voice isn't too bad, but regardless, let's talk about these polls. So they came out on the 26th or 27th, and they're from Ohio Northern University, and they were pretty good for Sherrod Brown. He's up by 13 over Secretary of State Frank LaRose. He's up by 12 over State Senator Matt Dolan. And he's up by 17 over Bernie Moreno, who's a businessman from the Cleveland area. And obviously, there's a few trends you can pick up on here. Brown's up big against everyone. He is doing better against Moreno than he is against Dolan and LaRose, and that matches what we've seen in other polls. If you look at Suffolk, he's up by 7 against Moreno, but he's tied with LaRose and only up by 3 against Dolan, and he runs best against Moreno in this East Carolina poll as well from June. So there are certainly early signs that Moreno's the weakest candidate. I kind of agree with that. LaRose and Dolan are both elected officials, and LaRose is won by 20 points statewide, so I think they both have their advantages, whereas Moreno is much more of a, he's more of an outsider. He's someone who I think is certainly going to perform worse just because he doesn't have experience. He hasn't run a campaign yet, and I think he's the most right-wing of these three candidates easily. So for that reason, I do think Matt Dolan would be a pretty bad pick for the GOP to run here, but I'm still pretty skeptical of Sherrod Brown's chance of winning re-election. So in 2018, he won by 6.8%. I think it's actually 6.7 because New York Times stopped updating this, but the official results were a 6.7% victory for Sherrod Brown, which is impressive. Again, he won Ohio, which voted for Trump by 8 points both times, and he's a good candidate. He's a popular incumbent. He's well-liked by Democrats and independents. He's decently popular with Republicans, and he's a good fit for Ohio. So, again, when I talk about why I think he's going to lose, I'm not tearing down his electability. He is one of the most talented politicians in the country. He's been able to hold on to his seat in Ohio, which has been zooming right over the past decade. But I do kind of want to talk about what happened in 2018, why I think there are some pretty bad signs for Sherrod Brown. So, for starters, he won re-election by 6.7%, and as you can see, he did pretty well statewide. He flipped a bunch of Trump counties up here, Wood County, Ottawa County, Erie, Lorain, which voted for Trump in 2016 but not 2020, but he won it pretty easily here. He won Portage, Mahoning, Trumbull, Ashtabula, and Lake. And Mahoning voted for Trump. It's kind of like Lorain. It voted for Trump the first time, or it voted for Clinton the first time, but then voted for Trump in 2020. So there are some pretty severe rightward trends in the northern part of the state. These are working class areas. They were very solid for Obama. Sherrod Brown did very well in both of these areas, but they are trending towards Republicans pretty quickly. And actually, Tim Ryan's actually from Mahoning County. He's from Youngstown, which is the largest city in the county, and he lost it in his Senate race by 3%. So Mahoning is very bad for Democrats, no doubt about it. And when you consider the fact that in 2018 it voted for Brown by 21%, that's likely a margin you will not be able to replicate, almost certainly. So, and again, he won in 2018, and that's impressive on its own. He won in a pretty Republican-leaning state as a Democrat. But it's important to note the circumstances. This was a D+9 environment, and to put that in context, the 2022 environment was R+2, and the 2020 environment was R+4.4, or was D+4.4. So it was 5% bluer than 2020 and 11% bluer than 2022. And you could definitely make the argument that 2024 will be a bluer environment. It'll definitely be bluer than 2022, and it could easily be bluer than 2020. But again, it will not be D+9, and I feel pretty comfortable, dying on that hill. I really don't think there's any argument that 2024 will be a blue wave to the extent of which 2018 was, and even if it is maybe a point or so bluer than 2020, that's still not great for Sherrod Brown because he's still having to run an environment that is more Republican. Additionally, he will have Donald Trump on the ballot. And Donald Trump is very popular in Ohio. He won it by 8% in 2020. As you can see, right, I didn't know why this page refreshed, but he did win it by 8% in 2020. And again, he did very well in a lot of these working class areas that I mentioned. These are areas that Brown was very well liked in, and Trump won them. So having Trump on the ballot for the first time in Brown's career, I think, is going to hurt him with working class voters in specific, but also with rural voters who are going to really turn out. And then to go back to 2018, you look at Jim Renacci, he was not really funded that well. Republicans pulled out of Ohio in August of that year. They stopped really trying to win here with Jim Renacci, because Renacci was a fine candidate. He was a former congressman. He wasn't anything special, but the Republicans really stopped trying to win here because they had their internals, they had the polls, they thought that it wasn't worth it, and they had a pretty easy path to maintaining the Senate. They had 51 seats prior to the election, and they all they had to do to retain that majority was to win states like North Dakota, Missouri, Indiana, maybe Montana, which they ultimately did not, but they had a pretty easy path here, and I think to them, they saw Ohio and just thought it wasn't worth risking the play there. So they pulled out, and ultimately they kind of left Renacci to fend for himself, but he wasn't really seriously contesting the race after that, and that's why Brown was able to kind of cruise to re-election. Now, obviously, you could make the argument that Brown still would have won had the GOP invested in the race, but it certainly would have been closer, and we don't know that for sure. So there's a lot of factors, I think, that went into Brown's re-election that I think a lot of people seem to forget. But yes, he can be a good politician, but he can also be kind of lucky in 2018 that Republicans did not seriously contest him. So that's the first thing. And I also want to look at two states in specific. I've already mentioned them. It's Missouri, Indiana, and I think these are states that are kind of eerily reminiscent of Ohio 2024. So Ohio is bluer than Indiana and Missouri. There's no doubt about that. In 2020, if you look at the results here, Trump won Ohio by 8. He won Missouri by 15. He won Indiana by 16. So these states are twice as Republican as Ohio, but they are similar in the way they trend. In 2008, Obama won Ohio by, I think, 4%, and he won Indiana by like 0.5, and he lost Missouri by 0.5. So relative to 2008, Ohio has moved 12% to the right, Indiana has moved 16% to the right, and Missouri has moved 15% to the right. So they have all moved double digits to the right since 2008. And they're all working class states. They're all Midwestern. They're all rural. They have a lot of voters that used to be Democrats, maybe like Bill Clinton, maybe like Barack Obama, like Democrats in the past that are now voting Republican. And ultimately, in 2018, which was a blue wave year, Democrats did very well nationwide. They lost incumbent senators in both these states. In Missouri, Claire McCaskill went down by about 5%, and in Indiana, Joe Donnelly went down by 6%. And so prior to the election, Democrats were favored in Indiana. FiveThirtyEight, I think, gave Joe Donnelly like a 60%. I don't remember exactly. It was something weird. It was like a 4-7 chance of winning. I don't know why they did it that way instead of a percentage, but they said Donnelly had like a 4-7 chance of winning, and I think they had McCaskill as a very narrow underdog, but they didn't expect to lose by 5. And what happened was Democrats not only lost these races, but they weren't particularly close. Again, in Missouri, McCaskill overperformed Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden by a considerable amount, but it's important to look at how she did relative to her previous performances, and she lost by 5%. And then in Indiana, Joe Donnelly lost by 6, and again, he was favored by many people to win re-election. So I'm certainly going to say that we could see a similar thing with Sherrod Brown, who's right now considered to be in a very, very competitive race, the same way Donnelly and McCaskill were. But ultimately, maybe he goes down by 4 or 5. Now, that's not a prediction, but I think it is kind of a snare in which you could definitely see that happening when you consider factors like trends and partisanship. And again, McCaskill and Donnelly ran in a blue wave year without a presidential election on the ballot. Brown has to do he'll have to run in a year that will at very least be less blue than 2018, and he'll have Trump on the ballot. And so now I kind of want to look at some exit polls just to talk about the electorate as a whole. In 2020, obviously, Trump did very well in Ohio. He'll probably do similarly in 2024. And he did this because with white voters, he was very popular. He won white voters by 21%. And that's a pretty significant contrast from 2018, where Brown only lost them by 6. So if Brown's outperforming Joe Biden by 15% with white voters, that's a good sign for him. And that's what he did in 2018. But the issue is, are there going to be enough voters that are willing to split their tickets? Because again, comparing 2020 and 2018 is one thing because they're two different elections with two different electorates and two different environments. In 2024, it's on the same ballot. You have the same group of voters voting in every race, and you'll have Trump on the ballot, which, like I've said, will likely help Republicans with white voters, especially in states like Ohio. And so if Trump wins white voters by this amount, which he likely will, I don't think there will be too much of a change in Ohio in 2024. I think Brown will, obviously he'll do better than Biden, but I don't think he'll get 47%. I think he might get 43% or 44% and not do well enough to win. And then you'll see a similar thing with voters without college degrees. They were pretty strong for Donald Trump. He won by 18. But if you go back to 2018, voters that did not graduate from college actually backed Sherrod Brown. And so that is, again, an impressive showing for Brown. You can't take that away from him, but you can look at the chances it maintains in 2024. We know college graduates are trending towards Democrats, and we know that non-college graduates are trending towards Republicans. That makes it all the more difficult for Brown to win these voters back. And I would argue that he probably loses non-college graduates. He only won by 4 in 2018. That was a whole different ballpark. And I think with Trump likely winning them by a pretty good amount, I think Brown loses ground with these voters. And then when you look at the final exit polls here, I do kind of want to look at union income type, just kind of working class voters. Union households, they backed Brown by 24%. But if you go to 2020, Joe Biden actually lost voters who belong to unions by 12%. So we saw a 36-point swing in just 2 years. And again, I think Brown's going to do well with union voters next year. I really do. But again, when you have someone like Joe Biden losing these voters by 12%, like he did in 2020, like he will likely do in 2024, it's going to be very, very, and I mean this sincerely, it'll be very difficult for Brown to overcome that. So let's go back to the map here because I think maps are always fun to visualize. The most working class areas of Ohio that are white, non-college educated, middle class income. It's these northern areas, and you look at counties like Mahoning, which Trump won by 1% in 2020, trended towards Republicans in 2022. I think Sherrod Brown will win Mahoning County. I think he will. I think it'll be close, but I do think he'll hold on to it. But it won't be by enough to kind of get into a statewide victory, right? So, for example, Mahoning in 2018 voted 14% to the left of the state. I think it'll vote for Brown by maybe 3, and I think he loses statewide by 3. So maybe it'll swing right relative to the state by a pretty considerable amount. I think we'll see similar things in Lorain County. This is another county that was very right trending in 2020. Brown won it by 18%. Trump won it by, I think, like 0.2 or something in 2020. I think Trump will win it again, and I think Brown will win it by maybe 10. And then you go to Ashtabula County, you go to Trumbull County, Portage County, and then Lake County. I think Lake is probably the best for Sherrod Brown. I know he did better in Trumbull, he did better in Portage, but I think Lake is the least right trending. And actually, if you go to the 2020 election results here, I think Lake was the only one that trended left of these counties I mentioned. Yeah, so I think Brown, since he won it in 2018, I think he could win it again. It'll be close. I think maybe he loses it by a point or so. But Ashtabula, Trumbull, and Portage, these are all counties that were pretty solid for Trump. Ashtabula, Trump won it by 23. I think Brown loses Ashtabula. Trumbull, he won it by 10. Toss-up county, but I think Brown loses it by maybe a point or 2. Portage, Trump won it by 12. Brown probably goes down by 4 there. So these counties that Brown won in 2018 with Trump on the ticket, I think he loses them. Additionally, let's go to Appalachia. Obviously, these counties in Appalachia were all very favorable to Jim Renacci, but Brown did better than Biden in a lot of them. The best example of this is Monroe County, which Sherrod Brown only lost by around 5%. In 2020, though, Biden lost it, think about this, by 54. A county that Brown was competitive in voted for Trump by 54. And Trump might win it by more next time. Maybe he wins it by like 58 next time. Because again, this is a super right trending county. And in addition to that, when you look at how Appalachia swung, Monroe County 7-point swing towards Republicans, kind of with the rest of Appalachia. So I would definitely argue that Brown is going to lose a lot of ground in Appalachia. And obviously, he didn't win any of these counties, but the margins he got were significantly better in 2018 than they will be next year. And that's going to hurt him because he won't be able to, cut into the margins Republicans are getting. And I think the final example of where Democrats are going to really suffer is in Toledo. They did very well there in 2022. It's kind of a bright spot. Marcy Copter did very well in her congressional race there. But Lucas County, Sherrod Brown won it with 60. He won it 2-1 essentially. Biden didn't even crack 60 there. He won it by 17, and it actually trended to the right by a point. With that, in mind, I think it's important to consider, Brown well-liked in this area. I think he'll probably win it by about 20, 22 points or something like that, low 20s. That won't be enough to win statewide. And so, again, Sherrod Brown's going to outperform Biden. I think Biden, like I said, I think Biden loses Ohio by 9. But I do think Sherrod Brown's going to have a really hard time overcoming Joe Biden's loss. He's a good incumbent. I think he's going to appeal to a lot of voters, but I don't think he's going to be able to appeal enough with working class voters, with white voters, with voters in urban areas that are not making as much money, maybe do not have college education, that are going to swing towards Trump. I think those voters are going to really, really cost Sherrod Brown this election. So I understand what the polls say. I think it's early. I think it's really too early to have any momentum here for the Democrats, but I kind of wanted to give my take on the race and why I think Democrats are still underdogs in Ohio. Could they win? Absolutely. Sherrod Brown's a good incumbent. Anything is possible right now, but I think for now, they're the underdogs. So thank you so much for watching. Again, I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you all in the next